about a third of the students who appeared in February in a show we did based on The Great Divorce by C.S. Lewis. I was going to see how many of you saw that show, but it might make me sad. But whether you saw the show or not, as a refresher, as an introduction, if you saw the show and if you've read the book, you know that it's a parable about purgatory and being a land that nobody really can describe, though Dante and Lewis have both tried. Lewis in a much more satirical and in some ways accessible way. It's based on these very broad characters who are perched in this decision. And the overarching conclusion of Lewis is that hell is something that we elect for ourselves, that we have agency in that. And it becomes this wonderful parable for how we live our everyday lives. It's a very hard show to do. You would think that faith integration would be sort of natural if you were, well, back up. I'm always surprised all over again when people see a disconnect between theater or entertainment and faith, because as the students could tell you, that's where a lot of the big work gets done. We have sayings like acting lessons or life lessons. It's impossible to not kind of fall back on the Christian virtues in order to be a good storyteller. And as T.S. Eliot said, it is in our entertainments where our real beliefs are formed, because we have no defenses against them, and we accept them freely and the ideology embedded in them. So for those of us who believe in narrative ethics and that our ethics are embedded in our storytelling, and that as the stories go, so goes the culture, so goes the life. The general craft in our field relies upon faith integration, whether people know that or not. So what I'd like to do is, having given you a general orientation about this land, I'd like to start with a scene between Bradley Black, and by the way, this is Zachary Poole, and Brad Black and Ashley Gibbons are going to come and do a scene where he sort of orients the wanderer, right, the clueless wanderer who gets off with all these badly behaved ghosts on a bus and has no idea what's going on. And he kind of orients her, and in doing so might orient those of you who haven't seen the show. And then I'm going to have Brad and Ashley just speak to some of the things that emerged from their participation, and we'll go through, and Zach is going to follow. And this is Aaron Wesselman, this is Don Williams, this is Dylan Reuter, and they're all going to sort of reference back what happened as the result of this project in their own lives, and as artists and as scholars.
Depends on the way you're using the word. If they leave that grey town behind, it'll not have been hell. To those who leave it is purgatory. And you best not call this country heaven, not deep heaven anyway. You can call this the valley of the shadow of life. Life, life, life. But to those who stay here, it'll have been heaven from the first. And you can call those sad streets in the town yonder the valley of the shadow of death. But to those who remain there, they'll have been in hell even from the beginning. Lass, you cannot in your present state understand eternity, but you can get some likeness of it if you say that both good and evil, when fully grown, become retrospective. So, not only the twilight in the town yonder, but all their earthly past will be seen by the damned to have been hell. And not only this valley, but all their earthly past will be seen by the saved to have been heaven. That is what mortals misunderstand. They say of some temporal suffering, no future bliss can ever make up for it. Not realizing that heaven, once attained, will work backwards and turn that agony into a glory. They say of some sinful pleasure, let me have but this and I'll take the consequences. little dreaming how the damnation will spread back into their past and contaminate the pleasure of the sin. That is why, at the end of all things, when the sun rises here and the twilight turns into blackness there, the blessed will say, "We have lived nowhere except heaven, and the lost, we were always in hell." Both will speak truly.
That doesn't strike you as harsh?
Well, I mean, that is the true sense of what they will say. In the actual language of the lost, the words will be different, no doubt. Some will say that he stood by his country, right or wrong. Another that he sacrificed everything to his art. Some that they had never been taken in, and all, at least, they remained true to themselves. Whatever that means.
And the saved?
What happens to them is best described as the opposite of a mirage. What seemed when they entered it to have been a veil of misery turns out, when they look back, to have been a well. And when present experience saw only desert, memory truthfully records that the pools were actually full of water.
Then those people are right who say that heaven and hell are only states of mind.
Oh, don't blaspheme, lass. Hell is a state of mind. You never said a truer word. But every state of mind left to itself, every shutting up of the creature in the dungeon of its own mind, is, in the end, hell. But heaven is not a state of mind. Heaven is reality itself. All that is fully real is heavenly, for all that can be shaken will be shaken, and only the unshakable remains.
But there is a real choice after death. My Roman Catholic friends would be surprised, for to them the souls in purgatory are already saved. And my Protestant friends would like it no better, for they say that the tree lies as it falls.
They're both right. Maybe. But do not tire yourself with such questions. You cannot fully understand the relation between choice and time until you are beyond both. And you are not here to study such curiosities. What concerns you is the nature of the choice itself.
But what do they choose, these souls who go back? I've yet seen no others.
There is always something they insist on keeping, even at the price of misery. There is always something they prefer to joy, that is, to reality. Milton was right. The nature of the lost can be best described in the words, "Better to reign in hell than to serve in heaven." So I'd like to talk a little bit about my role as George MacDonald. I'm not Scottish. I'm from Iowa, but still a faraway land. But the whole process of becoming George and tackling these really existential and theological discussion that he just flippantly kind of says, it was very challenging. And for the longest time, I didn't know what I was saying. And so that was really hard to memorize lines. But once I got what I was saying, I didn't want to say it because it was so convicting and I felt very hypocritical in some areas. And there were just so many things that I hadn't really thought about, and I didn't want to claim that as my belief. So it was kind of hard getting up on a stage and being this person and saying all these beliefs that he has or challenges her with. So yeah, it was very kind of weird, very difficult. It was a struggle throughout the entire thing, but it was very rewarding because I think anytime your faith is challenged, it's a good day. And there are some things that George says based on his beliefs and C.S. Lewis's beliefs and different theological discussions talking about heaven and hell and where we end up. It was very hard to say that to a room of people and really not be able to talk to them afterwards, in a sense, just kind of leaving them with that, which I think is very challenging to do. But this is Ashley Gibbons, and she's going to talk a little bit too.
Yeah. Okay, so my character back in the book was based on C.S. Lewis and his life. So something that was challenging for me is getting in there and really researching Lewis and finding out kind of what makes him tick and what led him to believe what he believes. And personally, I was going through a big crossroads in my life and my faith during the show, and it really helped me to follow along in Lewis's footsteps, so to speak, to see what kind of led him to Christianity and how he got there from his losing his mother at an early age to becoming friends with his group, the Inklings, I believe, who really helped him to believe, and how he described when he became a Christian as himself being the most reluctant convert in all of England. And that really spoke to me that you don't have to be at complete peace with God and every time you're facing a difficult situation. It's okay to be not okay. And that's something that really stuck out to me during the show that really helped me learn, and it helped me definitely deal with these heavy theological material and ideas that I'm, like Brad, not really sure if I'm okay with dishing out. And it really helped me come to peace and terms with everything going on.
Hi there. Again, I'm Zachary Poole. I'm going to touch briefly on just two things about the Great Divorce. The first of which, the original title was actually Who Goes Home, which I thought was a really beautiful title because it's kind of a question that we don't really think about very often, I think. Aaron and I, as well as Dylan and I think Samuel, we played two different characters, each of us. One of the beautiful things about that is in the play there's these spirits who come from heaven to bring these people from their past into heaven then. And playing both sides of the coin, it was very interesting to think about. So one of the characters I play is a murderer, and you would think that he would be the person who goes to hell, but he's actually the person trying to bring his old boss into heaven. If you want to do just a quick couple lines.
Well, I'm a decent man, and if I had my rights, I'd have been here long ago, and you can tell them I said so.
Oh, you'll never get there like that. Your feet will never grow hard enough to walk on our grass. You'd be tired out before we even got to the mountain. And besides, it's not exactly true, you know.
What isn't true?
You weren't a decent man, and you didn't do your best. None of us were, and none of us did. I'm looking at you, buddy. But Lord bless you, it doesn't matter now. So one of the things that I thought was really powerful about this scene, especially for me personally, is that it doesn't really matter where you're coming from. The importance, the beautiful thing about the Christian faith is that you have to say yes. That's all you have to do. I am not a person of faith. I have wanted to be my whole life, but because of some things that have happened, not quite there yet. One of the things that Monica says to me quite often is that faith comes to you. And I think doing this show was sort of one step closer to redemption, you know. The second thing that I wanted to touch briefly on is that our training here, doing a show like this, doing anything in the classroom, it's kind of twofold. Because as you become a better artist, you also become a better person. Don will talk in a little bit, I think, about something that'll tie in nicely to that. I don't want to spoil it, because I think it's really cool. But doing a show like this, it forces you to rethink who is, as C.S. Lewis would put it, who is an immortal. So it's you and me and the person who is pouring your water today. Thank you, by the way. They are immortals. It forces you to treat them as someone who is in the kingdom of God. And I don't think that those two things are separable. Integration of faith for an actor, for an artist, it's kind of everything you do.
So I'm going to talk a little bit more about the other scene that we had, and it's this relationship between these two artists. And we'll do a few snippets of it for you, and then I'll explain everything. There's like one really major point that I was left with during the entire process, and it kind of can boil it down to almost one line, pretty much. But yeah, we'll do that, and then I'll talk about that one line.
Of course, there will always be interesting people to meet.
Oh, everyone will be interesting.
Oh, of course, but I was thinking more people in our own line. When can I meet Claude or Cézanne or Bob Ross?
Sooner or later, if they are here.
You don't know?
Well, of course not. I've only been here a few years, you know. All my chances are against having run across them. There are a great many of us.
Well, surely in the case of distinguished people, you'd hear.
But they aren't distinguished. Well, no more than anyone else. Don't you see? The glory flows into everyone and back from everyone, like light and mirrors, but the light's the thing.
You mean there are no famous people?
They are all famous. They are all known, remembered, recognized by the only mind that can give a perfect judgment. So then the other part that really stood out to me was this one little section. His character says something along the lines of, well, if you are interested in the country only, nope, wrong part. But of course, as one matures, one becomes more and more interested in paint for its own sake. So we've been kind of going back and forth about this fame, the idea of fame and everything that comes from being someone generally in art or this kind of profession where other people are seeing and being affected by your product. And my character's response from that really kind of slapped me across the face, and it was something that I really needed to hear. And it says that, and I had to go back into the accent because that's just how I learned it. So, it's just, every poet and musician and artist, but for grace, is drawn away from the love of the thing he tells to love of the telling. Till down in deep hell they cannot be interested in God at all, but only in what they say about him. For it does not stop at being interested in paint, you know. They sink lower, become more interested in their own personalities, and then in nothing but their own reputations. So it was that, it almost felt like, at least my experience of being in that show was all for that one line and for that one message. Because as an actor and as an artist myself, you think about constantly like what's going to happen in the future, and if this career that I'm going on does play out and does go how I would hope for it to be, and I'm doing these important works, a lot of the time fame and this idea of being noticed and being seen on a high level is something that goes along with it a lot of the times, and it can be a dangerous trap to get caught up in that too, because it's almost impossible if you're doing these things in plays or movies where you are seeing that fame comes along with it because people just know who you are. And why I always try to reorient my mind to not ever be focused on that and be more focused about the art of it. It was a good reminder, especially now as graduating, going out into the world and where this is all prevalent and right up in front of you. It was really important for me to keep those words and solidify them in my mind as something to always anchor back to, that it can be an easy thing to fall into the medium of which you tell rather than the love of telling these things through God's talents that he has given you. And that's just what I was left with, and that's something when talking to my peers and other fellow artists and actors after that stood with them a lot and really spoke out that, and you can tell in the room too, it was almost like this silence that people just went, oh yeah. So I mean, for me at least, it was, this point particularly was something that was the pillar that this entire show was focused on, for me at least, and I think it's something important for not even just the discipline of art and artistry, but for any sort of discipline and career, that it's about the greater good that you can do, not about how it serves you.
First off, this show answered a prayer I prayed many years ago at the end of high school, and it was, God, help me see the beauty in people. And through this show, I realized that we as people are created as art. And it inspired a paper that I later wrote for my honors professor, not Dr. Cack, but Dr. Harrington this semester, which was talking about beauty and art and the classical definition of beauty, which is wholeness, perfection, lacking nothing, harmony. And so then looking at man and what C.S. Lewis is doing with that is when these characters are taking this transition from hell into heaven in this sort of purgatory state, very much like Dante does with his Purgatorio, and they're going through the different levels, they're becoming more and more perfect as they go. And it helped me to see this idea of sanctification is almost an art process by which man is restored and redeemed and made perfect art again, like he once was in the Garden of Eden. So from this, it helped me to see that man can be beautiful art here and now. And the process is not fully completed until, as the scripture says, Christ will continue the work later that he started in us. But it can start now, and we can begin that process of getting to know God. And I also believe it's very hard for us to, as artists, to create beautiful art and to share truth and to share real love, especially in this show where we have to be playing characters who like Brad said, we're saying things that, wow, we might be struggling with ourselves. In my scene particularly, I'm getting up there and I'm trying to ask for forgiveness from a sister who I have deeply wronged in our previous relationship. All of these types of things with love and forgiveness and joy, you can't fake these types of things. So as artists, in becoming God's beautiful art ourselves, we have to first be that art, have that love, have that truth, before we can endow our small works that we create with our movies and our plays here on earth to then share with others.
So I just want to start by saying this show was very, very tolling. We just had, every night we had to deal with these deep theological issues. We had to go from all of our classes and work and just regular relationships and dive into these really difficult, timeless situations that have been around for all of eternity and for as long as the world has existed. And it was really hard. And in the beginning, Satan was fighting this a lot because this has the potential to be such a powerful, powerful thing. And we were fighting it. It was hard to open up our hearts to that type of intensity. And so we just all got together one day and we had to be honest about our struggles, about our questions, about our beliefs. And I played the cynic who really believed that heaven didn't exist at all. And she just had this extremely cynical view on everything. And I'm not really that way, so it was challenging. And my first step at understanding her was embracing darkness. So if you've ever been to the main stage theater, it's pretty big, and when it's not being used, it's very dark and empty. And so before every show, I started just sitting in it and looking up and seeing the black ceiling, not being able to see above it, so it was just blackness above. And you sit in it long enough and it's very cold. And I started just feeling kind of the empty, cold darkness that is the purgatory we were trying to create for all these characters. And it was scary. And so even though my character didn't even believe in heaven, she's getting on that bus. She wants to go see if there's anything better than this. So I found myself in Psalms 139, which the verse is right before what were spoken earlier. And it says, "If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, even the night shall be light without me. Yea, the darkness hideth not from thee, but the night shineth as the day. The darkness and the light are both alike to thee." And I think that is so powerful because God's light is so much brighter than any darkness. So it was my going into the darkness that allowed me to find the light in this show. And that leads to my second point, which is spiritual stamina. Which just, when I chose to give in to these deep issues that we were dealing with in the show, I found myself actually getting it and receiving it and being able to take it. It's a lot. You heard from the little that was performed. It's a lot to take in, just that. But I think it's our job as Christians to go there. And I've had this issue with some of my teachers where they haven't gone there with me. As I've become able to take in more theology and stuff, I found myself in church services just receiving it, just taking in all the words of a worship song. And I just think it's our job as Christians to exercise that stamina, because we get into these habits of how much time we have to give to the Lord, how much we're able to give him right now because our mind is on something else. But it's worth it to commit to giving yourself to God, to give him that time and more, because these issues never leave us. And so that's just something that I found really important when doing this show, is that our job as Christians needs to be to practice this stamina, to exercise it by embracing these epic issues of the world today. So, thank you very much.
How do you guys think C.S. Lewis would have felt about, first of all, his story being turned into a play and your own performance of it? How do you think, as you looked into his life a little bit, would he be proud of what you did?
Well, I know that some of his works were originally radio broadcasts done in perhaps similar style. So maybe if someone came and watched us and closed their eyes, it would have been acceptable. But does anyone have anything to say?
I mean, I don't really know his like personality-wise, but I mean, I would imagine that he would probably just be happy to have his story out there at all. And this medium of like a theater rather than just a book is special in that sense because people can see it played out because it's not just words that you hear audibly, it's people living it out in front of you. And that's an entirely, some people can read it and not really take those messages, or they might not take it as deeply, but when you see it played out in front of you because you have more of like a response to it because it's another human being in front of you, maybe that would land those ideas a little bit more. So I would like to think that he would just want his story to be seen and heard more.
And I'm mad just because the show, go ahead, Ash, was so stylized, and because of the intimate space it was performed in, there was a lot of interaction with the audience. So and that was very Lewis-like for me. It's just not letting anybody off the hook.
Well, I think personally he would probably take a step back from his work specifically and look at how it's reaching people and look at how people are using that to come to Christ. And I think that would be the big thing for him, would be seeing, like, not specifically my work, looking at this, what I wrote. He'd be more interested in seeing, is this bringing people to Christ like I intended, like I was hoping for? And I hope that he would be happy with what we did.
I have artists in my family, and I know that a tension for artists is the tension between overt, clear articulation of a Christian position versus covert, sort of a hidden message behind a larger human message. As artists, how do you bridge that gap in a sense emotionally? And where are you in terms of your understanding of the impact of maybe that covert message?
It's a very difficult question. I think that's what we all struggle with, even in the working world as well. And I think that's what you see the struggle in Hollywood right now as well, where you have a lot of Christian films being made, or the subtle Christian messages in other films. That was part of what I was trying to get at in my paper, is perhaps one of the best things an artist can do, because the struggle is so difficult of whether to be overt or subtle, is to be the art themselves, and that would have an impact with who they interact every day, and that their lives would be more the canvas and have virtues painted through it that would reflect God. But I think also there's perhaps pros and cons to both, because the pros to doing the overt is that it's not as easily misinterpreted, which I think sometimes very subtle messages can be misinterpreted. But at the same time, I think as artists we want to find reality in all of the works we do, and I think sometimes when we're using too much Christianese in a production or a film, it has no effect upon reaching a non-Christian culture audience. So I think with every single work, it's a very diligent and careful process, focusing on exactly who is our audience. Perhaps we are trying to reach other Christians, or perhaps we're trying to go outside, but I think that's something that is very case by case.
And particularly with this show, it's a satire. So I think a lot of the way that we had to go about this was kind of handed to us in our choice of style, because we were very overt. Our characters were very overdone, and so that was very obvious. We were supposed to be able to be recognized right away as the type of character we were portraying. And the language itself also speaks for itself. So a lot of the inverted development of our characters was in the prayer and the backstage work. And we kind of had to trust that our being so obviously one thing was giving room for everybody to internalize for themselves. Because a lot of what we did, I think, was very outward, if that makes sense. So I think we were hoping that in doing that, it was supposed to be funny, for one, and help people receive the deeper messages, but also leave room for people to internalize it as they will.
So I'm Theresa Tisdale, and I'm on the Faith Integration Council. And so on behalf of the Council and the Office of Faith Integration at CTLA, I would like to thank you for coming today. I want to especially thank Carol and Randy and Monica and her students for the wonderful ways that you have demonstrated us about how you bring faith integration alive in your classrooms and in your disciplines. And I was thinking just in this last compelling question that was asked, I think that all of us go about our disciplines differently, and we're guided by different ethics in my profession as a psychoanalyst and psychologist about how explicit or overt that we're able to be, or whether we're working in more subversive ways or more covert ways. But what occurs to me, in keeping with the theme of virtue that Randy talked about, is that we can always be overt in the kind of person we are as we go about our business, our education, our theater arts, whatever our discipline might be. And I think that aspect of who we are, the core of who we are, in terms of our character, speaks volumes about who we are as people of faith. So as St. Francis of Assisi is known to have said, preach the gospel at all times, and when necessary, use words. So I'd also like to, in the spirit of what we've heard today, and the range of these wonderful presentations that were given, that the Office of Faith Integration and the Faith Integration Council and CTLA, we're launching a grants program. And so today, in your email inbox, you will receive a call for proposals for grants that we're going to fund up to $3,000, and there'll be a range of ways, a range of projects that you can submit, everything from service learning to a new classroom assignment that you're developing, some discipline-related project that's going to result in a presentation or publication, the scholarship of teaching, and there's a link that will explain to you more about that, and then something that may be course-related and robustly integrates faith and is intended for other Christian academics, and then another category for non-Christian academics. And so the deadline for the proposals will be May the 12th, and funding will be available July 1st. And and again, those grants are for up to $3,000, so look in your email inbox today for that call for proposals. And if I could quickly, if you would join me, I'd like to close in prayer today. God, I thank you for the opportunity that we've had to gather today as members of an academic community who desire to bring faith to life, whether it's in our classrooms, in our scholarly projects, papers, presentations, in our work as business people, in theater arts, in education. I thank you for these groups who have come today, Carol and Randy, and Monica and her students, who have given us such enlivened examples of the rich and diverse ways that we may indeed bring faith to life in all that we do. And so I ask you to bless us as we go, and thank you for all of your provision for us as we begin this season of Eastertide. And I pray in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Bless you.